So, dragons. Need I say more? I do, obviously I'm gonna say more since that's what this video is about. Anyway, I decided to make my own fantasy world centered around the question, what would a world inhabited by dragons look like? Groundbreaking, never been done before, completely original. I know. But I don't mean a world where a select few have dragons, but whole ecosystems of varying types. Different regions, different human influence, obviously tamed and feral. Dragons on land, dragons in water, and dragons in the sky. Basically, all the dragons. While I have started creating certain countries and areas, I haven't yet dipped my feet into drawing the dragons themselves. So that's what we're doing today. If you decide you like my dragons, maybe subscribe and stick around, as I plan to make a lot more videos and a lot more characters. I don't actually have a name for my fantasy world yet, so we'll workshop that one day, but not today. Let's get to the speed paint. I decided to start off with reptilian-inspired dragons, as they seem to be the most represented in modern media, leading me to also default into making reptilian dragons. Now, I will eventually get into dragons like avian types and aquatic types, but for now, reptiles it is. I did start with headshots. I have a problem of defaulting to the same look, the same skull shape, the same anatomy, so I wanted to create a page that were all different creatures, focusing mostly on uniqueness and shapes that I haven't really tried before. I did that by looking at real reptiles like crocodiles, geckos, bearded dragons, and snakes. Turns out the reptile world is kind of big. There's a lot of them. Who knew? I did try and keep them all in the same style, so I did all the sketches at the same time, followed by the lines and colors, just to make it a bit more cohesive. I found before I was using other people's art as reference to draw dragons as their fantasy creatures, and I didn't really think I could find real dragons. But really, you should be looking towards nature and things we know do exist and how they exist. It made sense to actually start focusing on real reptiles for shape. I find a sheet like this is always a really good character design exercise, because not only do you have an easier time playing with different shapes in comparison to each other, but you also have to consider canvas and space available. That naturally makes you draw silhouettes you may not have otherwise with a full canvas available to you. At this point, I'm not really worried about color. That's detail I can worry about later. I did, however, choose to color the eyes and certain details just so they weren't completely flat. Irises and pupils are one of the things I didn't really play around with, and I think I could push them a lot further. I pretty much gave them all snake slit pupils, and obviously there's a lot more shapes than just that. All in all, I found this exercise successful, and it was a great start for the rest of my drawings. After my headshots were done, I wanted to practice what I find hardest, which is designing the bodies. I really tend to default to the same shapes when I make my dragons. I like long bodies and necks with more angular bat wings. So rather than doing full-on line art, I decided to start with expressive silhouettes. The goal here wasn't detail, but experimentation. I wanted to play around with curves and lines, as well as the wings. I love bat wings on dragons, but once again, I just always draw them the same. You'll probably notice here that the wings are in no way anatomically correct. I'm a huge fan of expressive character design. I like to have exaggerated movements, and I found with wings, I can have a really hard time not making them stiff. But this helped me not worry about anatomy. When you're starting to draw something new, it's easy to worry about anatomy, resulting in a more stiff drawing. Of course, you do need to understand what correct anatomy is. I actively looked at bat and bird skeletons while doing these, and I started to understand that wings are essentially arms with really big hands. They have similar-ish joints to human hands. Once you understand how something works, you can better grasp it. You don't want to just look at wings, you want to understand how exactly they move and what purpose certain body parts have. This information is invaluable when drawing. Believe me when I say it will also make drawing said character a lot easier. Which leads me to my point of then breaking said anatomy. Again, I chose to focus more on shape than realistic movement here. I think going forward, I'll continue to experiment with how exactly I can break parts of a dragon for the sake of posing. These silhouettes were really eye-opening for me. They helped me see different ways I can draw these creatures. And putting them all on the same page also meant I could show size difference between dragons. I would say that all of them would be rideable mounts, but I will definitely make smaller dragons one day. Now that I've finished my silhouettes, it's time for the ultimate design test, and that's drawing finished dragons. I really enjoyed the creatures I made, so it was hard just picking 2 to finish. But I started off with this gecko/snake inspired dragon, mostly because it was the one I gravitated towards the least, so it just made sense to start with it. But that also meant it was time to face my broken anatomy, mostly in the wings. I realize now this dragon's arms are really elongated, which might not be correct, but I do really enjoy the shape it gives. I started off blocking in the body parts as it's easier to see all of the parts working together, as well as making decisions of the shape of said body parts. This was especially useful for wings, which if I haven't mentioned 50 times now, are really hard for me. As I was working, I started to gravitate towards a green color palette, which made me realize the little fin details, they kind of looked like seaweed. Upon seeing this, I promptly named the dragon Seaweed Eater. I think different areas will have different naming conventions. I do, however, always gravitate towards 2 words consisting of a noun and a verb. I actually even have a list of different words that would work well together for dragon names. I've already been working on a collection of islands inhabited by dragons and a small human settlement, so I decided Seaweed Eater would fit well in this area, especially considering its inhabitants are mostly reptilian dragons, who mainly have a diet of sea creatures as they are right by the sea, as they're islands. Well, sea creatures and apparently seaweed now. Seaweed Eater in particular has the odd habit of choosing seaweed over fish. This is mostly ill-advised due to the size of the dragon and needing protein. On the island, rideable dragons are rare. The majority of them are small. I'm thinking between dog and squirrel sized. Dragons can bond with humans, but not all of them. Particularly adult dragons and larger dragons are less likely to choose a human. Seaweed Eater chose their rider after they'd already reached their full size, which is quite uncommon. But for now, that's all I'll say, because it's time to move on to our second dragon. I believe I also based this little guy on a gecko. They have a much more stubby body shape. I've always loved the long, noodly dragons, so this was definitely unlike what I usually do. Partially why I chose them, but also, look at the dumb little face, how could I not? I almost immediately decided to call them Windweaver. They're on the smaller end of rideable dragons, which will mean they have a harder time carrying multiple people at a time. I do think size will dictate a lot about dragon strength and stamina, but it also determines where they can and can't go. Windweaver would have a much easier time moving in a human village, resulting in them being a very friendly and non-destructive dragon, unlike Seaweed Eater, who, while being friendly, is not used to coexisting with humans, and all the mindfulness that they would need with their size. One thing I started to think about would be intelligence. I do see these dragons as wild and tamed animals. I think the best comparison would be dogs and wolves. Well, not being human, they're very in touch with human emotion. They can follow certain commands, but also like dogs, their personality will determine how trainable they are. I see Windweaver as a golden retriever and Seaweed Eater as a husky. Both potentially friendly, but one will do anything to please you and the other has a severe case of stubbornness. I did include simple saddles on them just to give an idea of size when compared to humans and each other's. But saddles are something that I'll really have to work on and consider because it will determine sitting positions for their riders. But that's a different video. For gender, I'm exploring the idea that it wouldn't really matter for dragons, especially for an island of mostly wild dragons. The humans on this isle are fishermen. They have a unique relationship as they all understand the land belongs to the dragons. They simply allow them to live there. So they're very respectful and knowledgeable of the habits and nature of these creatures. And they really have no reason to care about a creature's gender as they don't worry about breeding dragons. So I think it's mostly they/them pronouns unless a dragon very clearly lays eggs, in which case they know it's a female. One question that's really important with animals is how they treat their young, because this determines emotion. Creatures that don't raise their young tend to not have emotional attachment in the same way humans do. So it does make sense that mother dragons would raise their children, especially because that would influence how humans and dragons bond. I don't know if breeding will be something humans fully understand, or something that kind of happens away from them. Again, it's something I'll have to think about later on. But for now, that's Windweaver. I'm really proud and happy how these two turned out. I definitely think they're my strongest dragon designs to date. Also, if you looked at my art fight, you may have already gotten a sneak peek at their riders, who I will also be making a video about. I should probably do an introduction. I'm Liz, by the way. If you'd like to stick around for this story I'm working on, please consider subscribing, maybe even like or comment. Feel free to drop suggestions in the comments, tell me about your own dragons, or even interesting facts about reptiles. But I think that's all for now, so thanks for watching. Bye!